Welcome at the Break podcast of the Creative Business Tomorrow event of NHL Standen. My name is Hidde Bruinsma, and in this podcast of around 23 minutes, we are going to explore the future of podcasting. And of course, I'm not alone in this conversation. My guest, Huib Scholtens, Head of Digital and Podcast at BNR. We had a dialogue on the strategy of BNR with regard to podcasts, the threat of big tech, the ways to make money with podcasts, data you need to pay attention to as a podcast maker, and what stage the market for podcasts is currently at. But before we get to those topics, I wanted to know more about Huib's own background. Because prior to joining BNR, Huib has been active in various positions in the world of digital media. He was, for example, co-responsible for the Nu.nl app, which he and his team grew from 0 to 6 million users in 4 years. After that, he worked for several years at Blendel, where he was the head of partnerships and publisher relations. And overall, he has over 9 years experience in the digital media sector. And since 1 June 2021, he's focusing entirely on podcasting and digital media. And that's also where our conversation starts, because I'm really curious to hear from Huib what for him was the main reason for making the switch to a position that focuses entirely on podcasting and digital media.
As you already said in the introduction, at my years at Blendel, the past few years in my career, we experienced a lot with different kind of content on our platform. So, for example, we've been playing around with video, we've been playing around with infographics, all with the goal to make users spend more time on our platform. And what really stood out is that audio, we could basically address a new time slot during the day for a user. And I think that's really interesting because it's not only while you're having breakfast, for example, and reading a couple of articles, you can also listen to content in the car or while doing exercises, for example. So I believe that the passive way of consuming quality journalism is really going to change the market. And I find it really exciting that all those big players are jumping into this market and all the big publishers are jumping into this market. So I think that there's going to change a lot over the years. And I want to be part of that.
So for you, the main reason was there's a new form of content which can be like listened to all the time when you walk around or when you do the dishes. And it is a new market which is growing really fast and you want to be part of that market.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And when you made the move, there was a press release about you were moving to BNR. Mireille van Ark, she is the editor-in-chief of BNR, said that an audio revolution is taking place at the moment. Yeah. And that BNR has been at the forefront of this development for years. Could you explain what being at the forefront of the audio revolution means?
Yeah, well, BNR Radio is obviously, we're making talk radio. So this is already something, podcasting is already close to our core business. And I think back in the days, BNR embraced podcasting in the early stage indeed. They did that by making podcasts available on the FM radio, but also we're organizing, for example, the Dutch Podcast Awards, one of the biggest awards in the Netherlands, to give prizes to the makers, the creators of the content. And during the last couple of years, also BNR together with FD, we tried out a lot of innovations in smart radio, for example. So this was a way to cut up pieces that we create on the radio and basically personalize that content to your special interest. Well, this is a project we recently stopped, but I do think that innovating in this market is something that BNR started really early indeed.
Could you share some things where you're working on right now on the innovating side?
Yeah, so currently we're also working on a major app update. So we're updating on our iOS app, our Android app. Also, we're going to move more and more towards being a news company instead of only being a radio, creating radio. So we can really combine those two and basically, I would say that we're starting to window the content on several platforms. So radio is one of them, the FM radio, but also online. The on-demand industry is coming, but also in video and in text. I think that the content that we create, we can window that over several platforms.
Okay, so you are going to make like content which is really suited for a certain platform.
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that you stay, in front of the audio revolution? You just mentioned you are working on a few new inventions, you are trying things, you are coming with a big app update. Are that ways that you ensure that, or are there other ways where you are working on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting question because I don't necessarily think that the goal should be to be at the forefront of the market.
Mm-hmm.
I think the market that we're in, the podcasting industry, is really evolving extremely quick. But also the market is getting more and more mature, and there are more and more users getting into this, are more and more listeners. So, yeah, like I said, I don't necessarily think that being at the forefront is the main goal. I think that the main goal for us is in the coming years to get a piece of the pie. Because the market is moving, I think that, we should definitely, together with FD, claim a part of that audio market, and then specifically, obviously, the target audience that we're on. So in the financial entrepreneurial market.
Yeah, that's your target audience.
Yeah, indeed.
And you broaden that to another target audience? Is it more the plan to be more deep on that target audience?
So I would definitely focus on the current target audience. So the entrepreneurial guy, the higher educated decisions makers, as we said internally.
Yeah, and I asked the question about how you stay in front of the audio revolution, because a lot of big tech companies are now diving into podcasting, digital audio, digital media. For example, you see that like companies like Twitter, Amazon, they took over some startups which are creating podcasts. You see that Spotify is pouring a lot of money into the podcast market. Of course, Apple is always spending money and time on the podcast market, but especially Amazon, I think, is working on really cool things on the podcast market. And there was an interview with Iwan Reuvenkamp a few weeks ago of DPG Media, and he stated that the Dutch media companies should work together to win from big tech. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think this is a common discussion. This also happened in online, this happened in video, this happened in digital advertisement. It's always interesting to see whether companies want to work together. I also think that, because I think that you're referring to the piece that Iwan was talking about, NPO Luister.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
So that's the platform from NPO where they basically want to claim a part of the distribution of not only the content creating, but the distribution of podcast.
Like a Spotify, but then from NPO.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's really interesting because the dynamics, what I see from that is that it's basically two major publishing houses, DPG Media and Media House, being in a big battle. And what I see is that Iwan is basically pushing NPO towards an aggregator platform, taking part in that, and then they really become a competitor of NSA Audio, which is obviously from Media House. So I think that
that's his goal.
Well, it's interesting to see indeed, because this is like Media House is taking another approach into the market than DPG is. And I believe that that's basically the bigger thing behind it. And that's also one of the things what makes this industry so extremely interesting for me, because the market is developing so quickly. There are major players in it, and like I said, that makes it exciting.
Yeah, so the market is moving really quickly, and it's going really fast at the moment.
Yeah, indeed.
In my opinion, what's not going really fast is like the money subject of podcasting. So I want to make a small turn to podcasting and money.
Yeah, let's talk about money. Always good, because at the moment it seems like everyone has a podcast. I mean, everybody where I talk with is like, hey, I have a new podcast, I make a podcast, etc. But I guess that there are only a few like people who make money with their podcast at the moment, which is actually quite bizarre, because people are so enthusiastic about podcasts, but it's not coming back at the money side at the moment. So I'm curious, could you elaborate how BNR is currently making money from podcasts? Yeah, so basically we have three major models in podcasting. We're creating podcasting obviously from an editorial side, and that's all focused on sponsoring and advertisement. And then next to that, we're also creating what we call branded content. So this is content that the sponsor also has an involvement in what kind of content we create. So those are the three major things. And then next to that, obviously, we also do some events, but that's not really to make it profitable or anything like that. That's more to engage the community of that specific podcast, or to celebrate if we have an 100th episode.
And if you look at like podcasts that you really make yourself as BNR, so without a company, it's mostly advertisements at the moment.
Yeah, it's advertisement and sponsoring. So it is possible for a sponsor to sponsor a specific show. Then they don't have any involvement in the content of that show.
So for my understanding, if a company like advertise on an episode or on a whole podcast, they have involvement in the show, but you can also sponsor like one episode and then you don't have any involvement in the show.
No, so if you're a sponsor of an entire show, then also if we do that from an editorial perspective, you don't have any involvement in the content that we create. Okay. That's only if you create branded content, then you basically can give us a question that we're going to make a show around.
And what we are now seeing right now is that you see like more and more ways of making money with podcasts. Of course, it's still in the early stages. You see now that some shows on Spotify ask money for a certain episode, or you can buy a subscription to a podcast, or people sell like exclusive content and you can pay a monthly subscription to have like access to that monthly content. And for example, NRC, you just mentioned them, they're making a lot of podcasts. They recently stated that they think that maybe in the future, all their podcasts will be part of their subscription model, like for the newspaper. So you need a subscription on NRC and then you have access to all their podcasts. Do you expect that listeners are going to pay in that way for podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is something that we're not sure. But it always, if this question pops up, I always have to think about the early stage of my career. Do we have time for a little intermezzo?
Sure.
Okay, so when I started my career, or when I was finishing my studies, I was basically rounding up. There was also a period where I worked in retail at a car phone warehouse, or how we call them in the Netherlands, a phone house. And it was in a period that the first iPhone came to the Netherlands. And when I saw that, and especially the software development that was involved on those devices, I thought, okay, this could be interesting. This could be something that can become very big. So after my studies, I basically start wandering around and start figuring out what I wanted to do. And I decided to join a web agency in the north of Holland. And back in those days, it was fully focused on creating websites, but it was also a small company with some nerdy guys who were interested in tech as well. So we started to play around with native development for iOS and Android. Or in the beginning only iOS, because then only had iPhones in the Netherlands. And at that point we only had one application. There was only one Dutch application in the Dutch market, so that we only had Buienradar in the Netherlands. And we decided that it was time for us to make a news app available with Dutch news content. So what we did is basically we start scraping nu.nl and we deleted all the advertisements, throw that into a native container, as you say it, and then into the App Store. Well, at some point there were 20,000 iPhones in the Netherlands. On 19,000 was our app actively used.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, but it was also interesting because we didn't have any collaboration with Ilse Media back in the days, later Sanoma, and then nowadays DPG. So at some point they reached out, okay, we can do that and we should take it offline. But the thing is, why I was thinking about this is that at that point, basically they couldn't do what we were doing. And they made us an offer that we could get €1 for every download that we generated over the different platforms. Or we could start collaborating with them on an hourly rate, for an hourly rate or an hourly fee. And for us, of course, back in those days, the market wasn't really it was not clear what's going to happen. And we thought, okay, let's build the company and grab the hourly fee and just start collaborating with them. Yeah, well, if we look back, we grew the platform to 6 million users over several different platforms. So on iOS, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry.
So you should pick the €1 if you look back?
Yeah, if you look back, then it would be better to pick the €1 indeed. But why do I think about this is because it really looks like the trend that we're currently in with audio, because I recently read that Apple generated over 500 billion only this year with App Store subscriptions and via the App Store in purchases. And I think that will also it shows for me that a lot of people have willingness to invest into entertainment, into self-development, into quality content. And I think this is something that is definitely possible with audio as well. And also the major platforms, Spotify, iTunes, are making it more and more convenient to actually get that subscription. So I strongly believe that at some point people will start paying for content. And obviously there will also be free content available. So it will probably be a mix of subscriptions, advertisement, sponsoring.
Yeah, it's a bit like the same with written content. You can take a subscription, for example, in a newspaper, but you can also go to a blog of someone and read the content for free.
Yeah, indeed.
And you will see the same with podcasting.
Yeah, I think so.
And do you have any idea what will be the main revenue models for podcasting in the future? We talked about advertisement, which you use with BNR, branded content, etc., subscriptions. Do you have something that you think that will be the main thing in the future?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be a combination of advertisement, sponsoring, and subscriptions. And I really hope that the main thing will be subscriptions, because it will enable everybody in the market to make quality on a higher standard. The way I look at it is it's going to be a game of bundling and unbundling content. This is always the case. So also with written media or any other part of media, also in video is a nice example. So if you look at video market, you have the companies that bundle all the content. So the Netflix, the Videoland, also you have basically the aggregators of content, which enable you to get a subscription, and all you can read subscription, or all you can listen, or all you can see subscription on a specific domain. And they basically bundle a lot of content. You could also get a subscription on one specific, in our case, podcast. And then it's really niche, so into the area that you're really interested in or where you want to develop yourself in. And there's also a willingness to pay if you unbundle the content. So yeah, I think it's going to be a game of basically see where it moves, and different parties will jump into this. This is also we see it already happening in the Nordics a lot. So if you look at Podme or Podimo, are some Netflix-like companies in audio, which already starting investing also in creating a lot of exclusive content for themselves, podcasting.
So they bundle a lot of content, and then you can take a subscription on their model and listen to all the content by paying €10 a month.
Yeah, and they basically want to, obviously they have the free content in there, but also they're aiming to create a lot of exclusive content by themselves, and also are asking Dutch publishers basically to start creating exclusive content for them. They will probably move overseas pretty quickly.
Or other people copying their model in other countries and try the same there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the companies from the Nordics again, like Spotify, who's going to conquer this market. Because I know that, for example, Podimo already has a 70 million investment, and they already started creating it.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. So this is not something that FDMG is not able to invest 70 million into the podcasting market.
Would it be something that BNR is also going to try at a certain point? Because now all your podcasts are free. Of course, you have the advertisement and the branded content. But would it be interesting also for you to, at a certain point, have bundle content and then let people pay a subscription for that? The same as what you have now if you have a subscription at the FD newspaper?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, but this is really something that the market is changing so quickly. But in the beginning, we would not go for the bundling content. We would go for the unbundling strategy. So basically get a small group, get a niche area where we get a small group of users to subscribe to content.
And then really on your target audience.
Yeah, obviously within our target audience. And this could also be we can make them also pay maybe for events or things around getting a subscription to being part of the community instead of for the content only.
And something totally different. I have a podcast on myself, I started a year ago. And at a certain point, downloads were going great. And we had quite some listeners. But for me, always the data of podcasts, it's still for me really in the beginnings. So I was interested, if you have a podcast at BNR, what kind of data are you looking at to determine if the podcast is successful or not?
Yeah, so obviously the amount of downloads is one of the important KPIs to look at. Also, one thing that I always find interesting is to see how the amount of time spent on a specific podcast. So if the majority listens to 95% of an episode, that also stated something about the quality of the content and also about the commitment of the user to that specific show. So I always find that really interesting as well too, because that's also showing for me that at some point people are maybe willing to pay for these specific episodes. And then next to that, obviously I think you can look at quantitative numbers, but also at qualitative feedback that you get from users. And that's also something that I'm really interested in to get back from users, what they think about the show, what they think about voices, and how we can improve the actual product and what they expect from us to do in the future.
So you're actively talking with like listeners and ask them for feedback?
Yeah, a lot.
And you're also actively tracking the metrics that you just mentioned about downloads, but also listening time.
Yeah, so I think that talking to the listeners is, of course, something that people that create the show is makes it more relevant. For me, obviously, I look more at the overall overarching numbers. In my role, that's more important, obviously, because that's generating the current.
Is there a certain time frame that you say, like, hey, we try a show for 3 months and then we see if it works? Or is it just like we go and then we see?
No, not really, because some of the podcasts that we create are also basically hobbies from the people that work here.
Okay.
So it's not all about generating money. No.
Hey, and we're heading towards the end of this conversation, but I have 2 more questions to end with. One of my favorite podcasts is the Tim Ferriss Show. I think it's one of the most popular podcasts in the world. I think he has over like 700 million downloads. Well, that's a good metric, I think.
Yeah.
And he recently made a podcast about podcasting. And then he stated that for him, the podcast market is still really in the early days. I'm curious, what kind of developments or trends do you see becoming very important for the podcast market in the next like 10 years?
Yeah, I think this is a really hard question to answer, because 10 years is obviously a lot if you look back 10
Maybe
years.
1 year?
Yeah, so I think the next year, I think a lot of those things we already touched upon. So it's going to be figuring out who is going to claim what part of the market. And also it's going to be part of people starting to pay for the content. So I think that the major thing is that together with all publishers and together with all creators of content, we basically have to raise people that listen to podcasts that there should be a willingness to pay in order to increase the quality of the content. So I think that's going to be the major thing. And that's possible in a lot of different ways. But I think everybody is aiming to see how can we make the user pay for content.
And you agree with Tim Ferriss that we are still in the early days?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this is going to change a lot and I think it's going to change a lot of in the next 3 years.
And the last question for everybody who listen and don't have a podcast yet, what would be your advice to people who want to create a podcast on their own, for example?
Yeah, I think you should just start. So to be honest, I'm also losing my podcast virginity here. To create a podcast, this is the first time that I'm in a podcast as well, and I think it's really important that you just start and that you also enjoy the journey of creating the content instead of only looking at creating or getting as much users in as you want. Like I said, for the most of the people that actually are having a successful podcast, it started as a hobby project. So yeah, I think just start. That's the major advice that I have.
That was Huib Scholtens, Head of Digital and Podcasts at BNR, about the future of podcasting. You can find him on LinkedIn if you want to connect with Huib. My name is Hidde Bruinsma, and I want to thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the Creative Business Tomorrow event of NHL Standen, and please reach out if you have any questions or comments about this conversation.